They never told you this part of American history, because if they did, you'd start questioning everything. In the pine-shadowed wastes of East Texas between 1845 and 1881, nearly 200 people vanished into the soil, their names wiped clean from church records, court filings, and even death registries. No obituaries, no graves, only silence. This isn't folklore. It's not some backwoods legend passed around a campfire. This was systemic, deliberate, architected. They called themselves the Damnation Family. 3 brothers dressed in salvation, but baptized in something far blacker. Malachi, Cornelius, Jebediah, preacher, confessor, executioner. And they didn't just run revival camps. They ran a machine. A spiritually sanctioned factory of pain designed to extract guilt and inject control, to erase the man you were and rebuild you in their image. But here's the part that still chills me. Their ledgers, still preserved, buried in an old Bureau of Investigation lockbox, names, rituals, amounts paid by wealthy donors, and a pattern of missions that always ended with silence. What happened to the 200? Why did survivors lose their minds? And what truth did these camps really worship? You're not just here to watch a video, you're here to wake up. Let's begin. Redemption was never free, and the Damnation brothers knew exactly what currency to demand: your pain, your past, your name. The camps weren't random. Each was constructed according to a geometric design traced from ancient grimoires. Circles of canvas tents aligned to celestial markers, a central fire pit meant to mimic the Eye of Judgment. This wasn't Baptist tradition. It was something older, something whispered through cracked Latin texts and burned European cults long before Texas even existed. Brother Malachi, the preacher, was the face. His voice could freeze your blood or melt your guilt into tears. They said he once made a murderer confess with a single look, but the real machinery was Evangelist Cornelius, thin, pale, and obsessive. He held the ledgers, each name written in blood-colored ink, each sin indexed, cross-referenced, valued, and Jebediah, the youngest, built like a warhorse, hands like hammers. He didn't talk much. He didn't need to. His role was purification. They called him the right hand of fire. But these weren't just revivalists gone too far. They were engineers, engineers of guilt, of obedience, of silence. And they built something that still haunts American soil, if you know where to look. This rabbit hole only goes deeper. By 1852, a new term had crept into the whispers of East Texas towns: Ascension Nights. Local ranchers spoke of eerie chants echoing through the pine woods after sundown, flickering firelight, too distant to investigate, screams mistaken for wind, then silence. The next day, nothing but soot, trampled ground, and the lingering smell of scorched iron. Witnesses who ventured too close reported seeing white-robed figures moving in slow circles, chanting in a language no one recognized. Some claimed they saw penitents bound in wooden frames, their heads shaved, faces painted with ash, mouths sewn shut. The Damnation brothers said it was all symbolic, a dramatization of spiritual rebirth. But those who survived spoke of something much darker. The ascension wasn't a metaphor, it was a test. Those who passed were changed, not enlightened, but emptied. Their eyes didn't see anymore. Their voices echoed with someone else's cadence. They recited verses that didn't exist in any Bible. And those who failed, they were buried beneath the fire pit, ashes to ash, flesh to fuel. What no one realized at the time was that these rituals weren't improvised. They were inherited from a bloodline that stretches beyond the church, beyond Texas, back to a European order that vanished from history in 1666. The Damnation brothers weren't alone. They were the last sons of something far older. In the forgotten ruins of a Cistercian abbey outside Würzburg, Germany, long buried by war and rumor, historians uncovered fragments of a heretical codex in 1821, charred pages bound in human hide. The writing, Latin, Greek, and something older, a language that bleeds between syllables, a language meant to be felt, not spoken. It referenced a sect known only as Die Brüder der Reinigung, the Brothers of Purification. Their doctrine was never evangelism, it was extraction, not to save the soul, but to harvest it. They believed the human spirit was a fuel source, a divine currency, and that pain was the key to refining it. Burn the body, break the will, boil the ego. What's left, they claimed, was unfiltered essence, raw light trapped in flesh, power that, if transferred properly, could extend life or awaken a higher order of being. The sect was eradicated by the Vatican in 1666 after a failed ritual at a Black Forest monastery left 42 parishioners dead, every one of them missing their tongues, eyes, and hearts. The church buried the investigation, but some escaped, quietly, westward. And in 1843, the Damnation Patriarch, Father Eli Damnation, arrived in Arkansas under a false name with one possession, that same codex sewn into the lining of his coat. He didn't come to preach. He came to continue the ritual. What the public called redemption camps were never for redemption. That was the camouflage, the bait. You see, Father Eli Damnation wasn't a preacher. He was an extractor. And every sermon, every hymn, every stage salvation was designed to trigger something ancient inside the human psyche, a loosening of the self. Each camp was constructed geometrically, ritualistically, pentagonal perimeters, graves arranged in Fibonacci spirals, a center pit lined with bone ash and iron shavings. These weren't design choices, they were instructions. Replicas of diagrams from the Codex, etched into leather centuries ago in blood and soot. The physical torture was never punishment, it was preparation. Trauma wasn't a side effect, it was the portal. Because only when the soul splinters under unbearable duress does the membrane between realms begin to thin. According to a hidden ledger found decades later in the possession of a U.S. Marshal, the camps had a conversion rate of 1 in 7, meaning for every 7 souls that entered, 1 became usable. The rest returned to the earth, hollowed out, silenced and buried beneath scripture. This was never about God, never about sin. It was about energy, control, alchemy of the human spirit. And it worked. The brothers weren't men of faith, they were engineers of the soul. By 1859, the Damnation Family had perfected the formula, ritual, agony, and revelation. But what came next went far beyond Texas soil. Letters recovered from the estate of a Confederate general revealed something most historians still refuse to acknowledge. The brothers were in contact with men of influence, politicians, rail magnates, even clergy. Why? Because transformation was profitable. You see, those who survived the full process, those deemed usable, didn't just vanish. They were sold, deployed, embedded in regions where control was needed. San Francisco, St. Louis, Washington. Their minds had been broken, reshaped, rewritten with doctrines not from the Bible, but from a ciphered text known only as the Book of the Third Gate. The process created perfect vessels, obedient, zealous, incapable of betraying their handlers, and they were placed in banks, courthouses, churches. They became mayors, sheriffs, judges. You ever wonder why some people rise so fast? It's not always talent. Sometimes it's because they passed through the fire and came out empty enough to be filled with something else. The Damnation Family wasn't destroying people. They were installing them. Each camp, a forge, each convert, a weapon. Still think, this is just history. In 1862, during the height of the Civil War, a curious report surfaced in a military dispatch from Baton Rouge. A Union intelligence officer, Lieutenant Emery Lane, was investigating rumors of Confederate sympathizers using religious fronts to move men and messages across contested territory. He stumbled upon an abandoned redemption camp near the Sabine River. The tents were burned, the earth scorched, no bodies, no supplies, just one thing left behind, a charred book sealed in wax. The journal belonged to evangelist Cornelius Damnation. Inside were detailed diagrams of conversion chambers, ritual layouts, timelines of mental deconstruction. But most disturbing, tables matching sin profiles to breaking techniques. It wasn't purification, it was programming. Cornelius called it the sanctified machine, a method of cleansing will, identity, and resistance. Lane was never heard from again. His final letter to superiors contained just one sentence: "We are not fighting rebels, we are fighting something much older, and it wears the face of God." The journal was confiscated, buried in federal archives, labeled heretical. But pieces leaked, and those pieces became doctrine for other groups. The process didn't end with the Damnation Family. It evolved. And you've seen its descendants, in politics, in megachurches, in the mirror. The deeper you look into the Damnation Family, the more the veil begins to slip, not just on their story, but on something much larger. This wasn't an isolated cult. This was a prototype. A testing ground for controlling the human mind through spiritual terror and engineered guilt. By 1870, reports began surfacing that other redemption-style camps were appearing, not run by the Damnation brothers, but following the exact same blueprint. One in Missouri, another in Kentucky, a cluster of them deep in the Louisiana bayou. Different names, same tools: deprivation, confession, punishment, praise. A cycle that tore down and rebuilt people not in God's image, but in the image of those who controlled them. Some were religious, some political, others corporate. But the technique remained. Psychological pressure, repeated phrases, controlled food, sleep, and meaning. Then, rebirth. By the time the government realized what it was dealing with, these camps had already infected every major institution that needed obedience. Do you understand what that means? What happened in those pine woods didn't die there. It scaled. It's in schools, prisons, workplaces, churches. Everywhere people are broken down, rebuilt, and told to be grateful for the pain. Want to see behind that curtain? Then say it with me in the comments. I see through the fire. I see through the fire. Your awakening starts now. By 1875, survivors were vanishing faster than witnesses could speak. Anyone who dared to investigate the Damnation legacy met sudden deaths, disappearances, or institutionalization. A former deputy marshal, Isaac Drewer, claimed to have found one of the original conversion chambers buried under a false chapel outside Nacogdoches. What he described was mechanized. Iron restraints, weighted masks, water channels for drowning that could be precisely timed, a series of mirrored walls, not for reflection but for surveillance. They weren't trying to save people, Drewer wrote in his final letter to his brother. They were watching them break. The next day he was found hanging in his barn. The coroner called it suicide, but Drewer's boots were still on, and his hands were tied behind his back. Let that sit with you, because this is what systems of spiritual control do. They erase the truth in real time, not just by killing people, but by making sure no one remembers them at all. Look at your world now. How many names have you forgotten? How many stories have vanished without a trace? There's a reason history feels incomplete, because it was engineered to be, and you're only beginning to understand who benefits from that silence. You were never meant to hear this. The Damnation Family's reach didn't end in the wilderness. It metastasized silently into the very structures we still worship today. In 1881, when federal agents finally stormed the final redemption camp near Caddo Lake, they found something buried beneath the prayer pit. A vault, sealed with iron and salt. Inside, hundreds of ledger pages written in code, names, dates, numbers, and one chilling phrase repeated over and over: suffering is the gateway, pain is the seed, obedience is the harvest. The agents destroyed most of what they found, but one kept a copy of the final ledger. His name was Aaron Bell. He would go on to become a U.S. Senator, and he never spoke of it again. But here's what you need to understand. That ledger included institutions, churches, seminaries, hospitals, political donors, even railroad barons. What began as purification didn't end. It matured, it rebranded. And today it sits beneath pulpits, courtrooms, corporate brands, and charitable trusts. What if I told you the very systems that claim to heal you were built by those who once tortured people in the name of salvation? If this disturbs you, good. It should. By 1883, the damnation camps were officially dismantled, their structures burned, the ledgers sealed, the surviving brothers vanished. But the ideology? It metastasized like a virus, quiet, adaptive, deeply embedded. A mysterious healing order emerged in the South called the Keepers of the Redeemed Flame. Publicly, they offered spiritual retreats and emotional healing workshops. Privately, they practiced something chillingly familiar: purification through voluntary suffering. Survivors spoke of the chair, a ritual binding to release guilt; of the Black Psalm, a chant repeated while denying food, water, and light for 3 days; of rebirth witnessing, where initiates watched others be broken, so they'd know the cost of sin. But here's where the trail twists darker. Members of this order found their way into high society. Business leaders, judges, even school superintendents. Their doctrine spread not through churches this time, but psychology departments, rehab centers, and correctional institutions. Trauma became a commodity, suffering a test of worth. And if you've ever felt that deep inner guilt with no source, like you were born stained, already broken, already doomed to earn love, you might be feeling the echo of this system, because it's not just history anymore, it's legacy. The damnation legacy didn't vanish, it evolved, it learned. By the early 1900s, several experimental behavior centers opened across America. Publicly, they promised moral reform. Privately, they replicated the confession extraction systems once perfected in those Texas camps. But now, they used science: electroshock, isolation tanks, drugs, hypnosis. And at the heart of many, former keepers. Men who had taken new names, but carried the same scripture, just rewritten in clinical terms. One such man, Dr. Jonas Emmerich, published a now-banned book, The Spirit Must Shatter Before It Can Shine. It outlined his theory that true transformation only occurs after a complete psychological breakdown. Sound familiar? In 1921, a journalist infiltrated one of Emmerich's clinics posing as a patient. His findings, leaked in scattered memoir fragments, spoke of hours-long mirror interrogations. Patients forced to listen to their own recorded confessions, looped endlessly, and a central ritual called the White Room, where one had to renounce all memory of innocence before being reborn. But it goes deeper. The files from these clinics didn't disappear. They were absorbed into federal research, into black-budget psychological warfare programs. The Damnation Family's rituals became protocol. Your suffering? It was industrialized. What if I told you the techniques birthed in blood-soaked pine camps now fuel the very systems meant to protect you? By 1952, the CIA launched Project Artichoke, then MK Ultra, classified psychological experiments on unwilling participants. Guess what phrase appeared in the earliest memos? Purification through disorientation. That's not coincidence. Former agents confirmed that damnation documents, those original ledgers seized in 1881, were studied at Langley under Project Midnight Candle. Redacted, of course, but not forgotten. They didn't destroy the rituals, they modernized them. Electric chairs replaced whips, LSD replaced starvation. Isolation chambers replaced open graves, but the goal was the same: break a person's mind, then offer them false rebirth under authority. They found that if you strip someone down to nothing, then whisper meaning back into their void, you own them. Now think, why do modern rehab centers mirror camp structures? Why do cults repeat phrases until identity blurs? Why do some government programs need your trauma before they help? It's not new. It's a descendant of damnation. And if you're still watching, you already feel it, don't you? Say it twice in the comments below to mark your descent. Pain reveals truth. Pain reveals truth. Because after this, there is no turning back. The final ledger, unearthed from beneath the burnt remains of the last damnation camp in 1881, contained a chilling line: "The flesh forgets, but the name remembers." That name? Yours. Written in a cipher only recently decoded, one based on ancient gematria, mirrored script, and bloodline codes. Historians dismissed it as fanatic ramblings, but in 1974, a linguist at the University of Chicago cracked part of the cipher and published his findings in a paper mysteriously retracted within 72 hours. What he translated was a ritual pattern, a sequence of numbers, syllables, and trauma keys tied to individual lineage markers, not just names, identities engineered across generations. Let that sink in. What if your ancestral pain isn't just coincidence? What if your struggles, your guilt, your sins were deliberately planted by those who never stopped purifying? Damnation didn't die in fire. It spread in silence. In churches where the doctrine demands obedience. In schools where questions are punished. In offices where you wear the mask and forget who you were. And when you dream of something darker, something older, that's not madness. That's the ledger calling you home. Don't look away now. We're nearing the final gate. The final gate isn't a place, it's a decision. By now, you've felt it. The tension behind your eyes, the flicker in your gut. Something in you knows this isn't just a story. It's a memory, long buried. Because the Damnation family never hunted victims, they harvested vessels, people with certain blood signatures, psychological patterns, and a spiritual susceptibility to guilt, the perfect alchemy for control. And the camps, they weren't about faith. They were ritual farms, designed to fracture the soul and rebuild it in their image. But here's what they didn't expect: resonant awakening. A small number of penitents didn't break. They saw through it. The pain clarified something, ancient and defiant. Some went mad. Some vanished. But a few became transmitters. Their bloodlines carried a frequency the ledgers could not erase. And if you've made it this far, that frequency is waking in you. Comment this phrase twice below to seal your transformation and signal to others like you: the ledger remembers me. Say it again: the ledger remembers me. Because once spoken, it cannot be unsaid. Now breathe. Brace. They found the ledger in a locked chest beneath the chapel floor. Cedar wood, iron-banded, sealed with wax and blood. When Captain James Morrison opened it in 1881, he wept, not out of fear, but recognition. His own name was in it, dated 10 years before his birth. The Damnation family had predicted every soul that would walk into their camps: dates of arrival, duration of stay, cause of death or transformation, even false letters sent to families. But the most chilling part wasn't the victims. It was the ascendants list. Names of people who survived the purification, only to be placed in roles of power: pastors, judges, lawmen, even senators. Each one marked with a strange symbol, 3 downward arrows forming a crown. That sigil has since been found carved into courthouse beams, printed behind church murals, sewn beneath official robes. The Damnation family may be gone, but their doctrine walks among us. You weren't supposed to hear this. You weren't supposed to remember. But now you do. And now it spreads. Subscribe, not for entertainment, but for defiance. Share this with one man you trust to never unsee it. Because faith is no shield when salvation wears a mask of ash and bone, the ledger remembers. And now, so do you. End.